The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has plagued the Middle East for decades, and violence has been a consistent fixture in the relationship between the two groups of people, the Israelis and the Palestinians. Now, we can go all the way back to the very birth of the Israeli state in 1948, when Israel declared itself an independent country, and a war was fought with its Arab neighbors, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. Fast forward to 1967, known as the Six-Day War. There was another, episode of violence between Israel and its Arab neighbors. This time, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, largely over the Palestinian claims for sovereignty and statehood. In 1973, you had the Yom Kippur War, where again Israel fought with its Arab neighbors, this time Syria and Egypt, over the territory in the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights. And, at the end of these conflicts, the Jewish state of Israel expanded, and the Palestinian Arabs were forced to live under the banner of the nation state of Israel. Following these wars were a series of Palestinian intifadas, or uprisings as it is known, which were a type of violent resistance movement to what the Palestinians called this Israeli occupation and governance. And so the first intifada was between 1987 and 1993, then a second from 2000 to 2005. In fact, Hamas emerged first in 1987 as a paramilitary group with the objective, it had at its central objective, to wage a resistance war against the state of Israel. Now, between 2008 and 2023, October 7th to be exact, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there has been numerous terror attacks by Hamas against Israel. In response, the Israeli military launched several counter-terrorist incursions against Hamas, particularly in the Gaza Strip. So the question that is on all of our minds is why? Why have these two groups of people been at each other's throats for such a long time? Scholars and commentators have offered various arguments. Let me share one that I think is most instructive in contextualizing and understanding this crisis of the Israeli-Palestinian war. The conflict, in my view, is the result of a fundamental clash of divergent identities between the Israeli and Palestinian people. Writers like Anthony Giddens, Benedict Anderson, and Ernest Gellner suggest that identity relates to those socioeconomic, linguistic, historical, political, religious, and biological markers of the self. In fact, what I have recognized is that identity quite often emerges from a position of negation. So I am this because I am not that. Now, as it relates to the Israelis and the Palestinians, they have divergent ethnic identities, so Jewish and Arab. They have divergent religious identities, Judaism and Islam. And they also have divergent political identities. Each group defines themselves in what I call ethno-nationalistic terms. And they make historical, cultural, religious, and racial claims to the same geographic space. And this really is where the problems have emerged between these two groups. So this clash of these polar identities continues to intensify as one group, the Jewish people, have entrenched all the variants of their identity under the banner of the nation state of Israel, whilst on the other hand, the Palestinians have not been able to legitimize their historical, religious, ethnic, and political identity claims in the form of what they ultimately want, a Palestinian state. Now, as a result of these polar identities and this clash of identities, what we have recognized and what we are witnessing is a security nightmare for both groups of people. Israel has long sought security for its state, given its tumultuous history and the hostility it has faced from its Arab neighbors. The strategies employed by Israel to safeguard its citizens have at times intensified tension. So the airstrikes, the military occupation, they have intensified the tension between the two groups. The building of a security barrier and essentially containing the Palestinians in the densely populated Gaza Strip, and the use of military technologies and checkpoints within the West Bank have sought to intensify the relationship. On the Palestinian side, Palestinians living in Gaza and the West Bank live with a constant sense of insecurity, economic hardships, restrictions on movement, and occupation have left many feeling trapped and vulnerable. And this further fuels the desire on the part of the Palestinians for statehood and independence. And in fact, what it has done is to radically motivate a group like Hamas to use strategies of terrorism. What is terrorism? So terrorism really is the use of violence by non-state actors against civilian targets for political reasons. And the act of terrorism by Hamas has further complicated the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. Hamas has weaponized the objective of achieving Palestinian statehood by using terrorism and terror strategies as a tool to drive regime change, to accomplish territorial changes, and to influence and shape Israeli and Western policies on the question of Palestinian sovereignty and statehood. The terrorist strategies of Hamas quite often involve the use of violence to challenge the Israeli state. Hamas's use of rocket attacks, suicide bombings, mass public shootings within the state of Israel, kidnappings, is really a strategy of provocation. The recent terrorist attacks of October 7 had the intent on the part of Hamas of inciting a conflict with Israel. Hamas also sought to provoke its allies, its friends, Hezbollah and Iran, to enter into a war with Israel by citing the humanitarian crisis in Gaza that follows Israel's military response. Another strategy that Hamas employs is a war of attrition. This strategy is used to convince Israel that Hamas is determined to inflict maximum destruction and violence. A war of attrition is a long-term one, with the aim of constantly and consistently inflicting the costs of warfare and violence until one's demands are met. So the question now, or the other question, because there are several questions, is from here to where? What is the path forward towards security and peace between these two groups of people? Let me suggest three, which has been talked about much over the years. One, the political solution, which is to promote a two-state solution to the crisis. A Palestinian state alongside Israel with recognized borders can provide a framework for peaceful coexistence. Negotiations that consider the needs, the security, and the nationalistic aspirations of both groups of people is very vital and necessary. And sure, a two-state solution comes with its challenges, but in my view, it certainly moves us, or moves the Israeli and the Palestinian people further down the path towards peace and stability rather than conflict and warfare. Secondly, the socio-economic solution. There needs to be a promotion of economic development and an improvement of the living conditions, particularly for the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Improved living conditions and an improved quality of life can reduce the allure of extremist ideologies, and quite frankly, it can diminish the status and appeal of Hamas. Third, and perhaps the most immediate pathway to a solution is the security dimension. Hamas and other terrorist groups must be denounced and dissolved. However, this will not happen if the conditions and the policies that give rise to radical extremism and terrorist ideologies are not addressed. In fact, Israel runs the real risk of inciting and growing the recruitment base of Hamas as it carries out its war against terrorism. We have seen this playbook before. The United States, in its war against terror after the 9/11 attacks, have engaged in a long war, a war of attrition in Afghanistan with the Taliban. And 20 years after, the Americans had to pull out of Afghanistan. Billions of dollars spent, many lives lost, and the Taliban is still around. There is really no easy answers to this Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But if only the Israeli and Palestinian people could dare to imagine themselves living in peace, if only they could rehumanize each other, if only they could develop a mindset that allows them to mutually coexist with their neighbors. Until next time, this is Damon Blake with Talking Point. Take care.